these incidents. Well, let's get some analysis on this story, and joining me live from Miami is Collin Laverty from Cuba Educational Travel, a group that specializes in connecting US and Cuban citizens. Collin, thanks very much for joining us. How much of a step back do you think this is in relations between the two countries?
Well, I think we'll find out in the coming weeks and months ahead. I think on the surface, this is incredibly alarming. I think there's a couple of things that are going to cause significant hardship for the U.S. and Cuban people. There's a travel advisory that could negatively affect U.S. travelers going to Cuba, which I don't think is warranted. There's zero risk for U.S. travelers in Cuba. It continues to be one of the safest places in the world. So that's completely unnecessary and out of context. And then with a scaling back of the U.S. Embassy, we've already heard from countless Cubans who are going to not be able to come and visit their family members in the United States.
Yeah, I guess you have an inside track into sort of the more personal stories of Cubans and Americans wanting to visit. What have Cubans and Americans been saying to you in terms of this story and just in a wider context, the relations between the two countries?
Well, I think from the American perspective, our office has been bombarded with calls today whether, travelers are curious whether it's safe to go to Cuba. And the State Department's press release today even indicated that there's zero evidence from their investigation that any of these incidents have affected private citizens or will affect private citizens. Nevertheless, they included a travel warning. So I think Americans are curious about what it means, and I think they're somewhat nervous because the State Department's included a travel warning. I think when they look at the facts, they all recognize that it continues to be safe to travel to Cuba, one of the safest places in the world, actually. In terms of Cubans, there's well over 1 million Cubans that live in the United States. And so the 11 million Cubans on the island, it's very important for them to be able to get visas to come here and travel to visit their loved ones. And you have scientists, academics, and others that are involved in collaborative projects. And so all of those things are at risk right now.
And this story, or this scenario with the diplomatic staff in Havana, comes at a time when Raul Castro is preparing to leave his position and Donald Trump is firming up his views on the country. Where do you see this going into the future?
Well, hopefully calm and patience and pragmatism can rule. I think that it's an incredibly important time for the United States to have a presence in Cuba. Not only is Cuba undergoing a political transition, there's a process of economic reform, and the United States and Cuba have made incredible strides over the last couple of years in terms of talking to each other, cooperating on issues such as drug interdiction, environmental issues. Just a couple weeks ago, there was a hurricane that was hitting Cuba and Miami at the same time. So it's imperative that we talk to each other, and I think the majority of Americans feel that way. Certainly the majority of Cubans feel that same way, and so I'm hoping that will prevail.
Collin, we appreciate your time. That's Collin Laverty in Miami, president of the Cuba Educational Travel, which organizes educational exchange programs between US and Cuban citizens.